Imagine Rome, deep into the imperial era. A historian sits at his writing desk in a marble-walled villa, the oil lamp throwing long shadows across rolls of papyrus. He is composing the history of an empire, every triumph, every massacre, every fire that has burned through the capital. And in one passage, almost spat onto the page, he writes about a small religious group he holds in open contempt, a group founded by a man executed by Roman authority in a distant province. The historian is Tacitus. The work is the Annals. And according to scholars including Robert van Voorst, in Jesus Outside the New Testament, and John P. Meier, in A Marginal Jew, this passage is treated as one of the most carefully analyzed non-Christian references to a founding figure of Christianity. What makes the passage extraordinary is not what it says about Jesus. It is who said it. Tacitus's anti-Christian bias is explicit in the text. There is no motive in his prose to invent a sympathetic account, because nothing in his account is sympathetic. The contempt eliminates the possibility of pious forgery. And it leaves modern historians with something rare, an account of early Christian origins written by someone who actively wished those origins had never occurred. Tonight, we examine what one of the most hostile pens in Rome accidentally preserved. To understand why historians care so much about a few sentences in a Roman history book, you have to understand what kind of book the Annals actually is. According to Wikipedia, an annal is a concise historical record in which events are arranged chronologically, year by year, though the term is also used loosely for any historical record. Tacitus structured his work along exactly those lines. Year by year, he tracked the reigns of Roman emperors and the political and military events of the empire. It was not a work of theology. It was not a work of philosophy. It was administrative, political, and military history, a chronicle of power. That genre matters. Annals were not where Roman writers invented religious propaganda or composed apologetic for foreign cults. They were where elite historians settled scores with dead emperors and recorded what had happened, often coldly, with as much documentary precision as the surviving records allowed. The text we read today does not come down to us through an unbroken chain. The Annals survive in two medieval manuscript traditions, known to scholars as Codex Mediceus I and Codex Mediceus II, both held in Florence. These two codices are the spine of nearly everything modern historians know about the surviving books of Tacitus's chronicle. Without them, the work would be effectively lost. That is one of the quiet realities of ancient history. Even the most respected historian of imperial Rome reaches the modern reader filtered through medieval copyists, working centuries after the original was written, in libraries far from the marble villas in which Tacitus once composed. And yet, despite that filter, scholarly consensus holds the surviving text to be authentic. It is into this carefully studied, painstakingly preserved chronicle that the most discussed non-Christian reference to a man executed by Rome was inserted by its original author. Scholars cited in Jesus Outside the New Testament and A Marginal Jew treat this single passage as the most important non-Christian reference to Christian origin surviving from a Roman historian. Imagine a monk in a medieval scriptorium, hunched over a fragile codex. Outside, the bells of Florence. Inside, candlelight on parchment. He copies a passage he barely understands, a passage about a man named Christus, executed in a distant Roman province, and a movement his author treats with disdain. He cannot know that what he is preserving will become, 1,000 years later, one of the most analyzed paragraphs in the historical record of antiquity. What scholars find compelling about this passage is not its content alone. It is its provenance. Robert van Voorst, in his published study Jesus Outside the New Testament, examines this passage as part of a broader corpus of non-Christian references to Jesus in the ancient world. John P. Meier, in A Marginal Jew, treats it as part of his foundational historical reconstruction of who Jesus was as a historical figure, independent of theological tradition. Both treatments rest on the same observation: Tacitus's anti-Christian bias is explicit in the text. He does not write as a sympathizer. He does not write as a neutral observer. He writes as a Roman elite who regards the movement as a contagion, and that posture is precisely what makes the testimony useful to historians. Historians have a category for sources like this. They are sometimes called hostile witnesses. A hostile witness who concedes a fact damaging to his own position is, by basic logical reasoning, providing some of the most weight-bearing evidence available. If a Roman historian who holds early Christians in contempt nevertheless writes that the movement traces back to a specific man executed by Roman authority, that admission cannot easily be dismissed as religious invention. Tacitus had no incentive to invent anything that would honor the group or its founder. This is the asymmetry that scholars cited in Van Voorst's and Meier's studies repeatedly emphasize. The standard skeptical move, that early Christian sources fabricated the historical existence of a founding figure, collapses when confronted with a hostile, non-Christian source confirming the same basic biographical claim. It is also why the survival of the two Mediceus manuscripts in Florence matters so much. Without those medieval copies, this hostile testimony would not exist for modern historians to weigh. Every line of analysis in the modern scholarship, every chapter Van Voorst dedicates to the passage, every paragraph Meier devotes to it, ultimately rests on those two codices and the scholarly consensus that the text they preserve is authentic. That consensus is not enthusiastic. It is not devotional. It is methodological. Generations of textual critics have examined the manuscript tradition, examined the language, examined the rhetorical posture of the surrounding paragraphs, and concluded that the passage is, as best as ancient textual criticism can determine, what Tacitus actually wrote. Which means that one of the most hostile voices in surviving Roman literature, almost in spite of himself, becomes one of the most cited witnesses outside the New Testament to the basic historical claim that Christian origins trace back to a man executed by Rome. But there are limits to what this evidence can do. And taking those limits seriously is part of what separates historical analysis from religious argument. Tacitus's passage, even on the most generous reading, confirms execution. Nothing more. It does not confirm resurrection. It does not confirm miracles. It does not confirm divinity. None of those claims are within the scope of what a Roman historian writing about a movement he despised could or would substantiate. The scope of the evidence is narrow. It must remain narrow. There are also limits imposed by the manuscript tradition itself. The Annals do not survive in a continuous, well-attested chain from antiquity. They survive in two medieval codices in Florence. That is enough for scholarly consensus to regard the text as authentic, but it is not the same as having a dozen independent manuscript families cross-checking one another. Ancient texts are fragile things, and the corpus of Roman historical writing that reaches us at all reaches us thin. There is also what Tacitus does not tell us. He does not give us a portrait of the executed man. He does not give us his teachings. He does not give us a chronology of his life. He gives us, at most, a sentence or two about the origin of a movement Rome found inconvenient. That is the scope of the source. To stretch it further is to misuse it. And there is the question every careful reader must ask. The fact that the text was preserved by Christian copyists working in medieval Florence raises the natural question of whether the passage could have been altered to suit later religious purposes. The reason the scholarly consensus rejects that hypothesis is, again, internal to the text. The hostility is real. No Christian copyist forging a passage would write it the way Tacitus wrote it. The contempt protects the testimony. That is the strongest defense the passage has, and it is also the strangest. The very thing that should make modern Christians uncomfortable about Tacitus is the very thing that historians cite to confirm he actually wrote it. What does this leave us with? It leaves us with a passage in one of the most respected works of Roman historiography, written by a historian with no sympathy for Christianity, preserved through two medieval codices in Florence, and treated by modern scholarship as authentic on the grounds that no Christian forger would have written something so unflattering. For history, this is significant. It means that the question of whether a historical figure existed at the root of the early Christian movement cannot be answered solely by appeal to Christian sources. There is an external, hostile, Roman witness. That witness is cited in Van Voorst's Jesus Outside the New Testament and discussed in Meier's A Marginal Jew, alongside other non-Christian references from the ancient world. For the broader claims of the Bible, this passage proves nothing about doctrine. A Roman historian working from imperial archives is not in a position to evaluate, confirm, or refute the theological claims of the Gospels. What he is in a position to do is record that the movement existed, that it traced back to a founder, and that founder met a specific Roman end. The narrowness of the evidence is part of its strength. It does not overreach. For an audience used to a stark dichotomy, either the Bible is verifiably true or it is mythology, Tacitus offers something more uncomfortable than either position. He offers documentary minimalism. He confirms a sliver. He refuses the rest. He gives the modern reader exactly as much as a hostile Roman historian would have been willing to write down, which is, by historical standards, not nothing. That is the honest weight of the source. Not a vindication. Not a refutation. A single hostile paragraph that survived 2 millennia and 2 medieval manuscript traditions because the man who wrote it could not stand the people he was writing about. There is a question worth sitting with at the end of all this. If the only surviving non-Christian reference to the origin of Christianity had been written by a sympathizer, by someone who admired the movement, who shared its hopes, who wanted its founder remembered, historians would, rightly, treat that source with suspicion. They would ask what the writer had to gain. They would discount the testimony accordingly. What happens, instead, is the opposite. The most important non-Christian witness preserved in the medieval codices of Florence, the witness studied by Van Voorst and Meier and a long line of historians, is a Roman writer who treats the movement with explicit contempt. He had no reason to lie in their favor. He did not lie in their favor. And yet he wrote down enough to anchor a sentence of basic historical fact about the man at the movement's origin. What do you do, as a careful reader of history, with a hostile witness who tells the truth? That is the question Tacitus leaves on the table. He does not answer it. He only delivers it.